Every year around Christmas time, something wonderful happens in the waters off Hawaii. The whales come back. These are the humpbacks, so called because of their distinctive style of diving. Giant 40-foot leviathans that return here each year to breed and give birth in the crystal clear waters off the island of Maui. And here in the warm tropics, they sing that strange and mysterious song that is unique to the humpback whales. The humpback whale is larger than any creature that walks the earth and may have one of the most sophisticated brains of any animal in the world. Once they populated every ocean and sang their song through all four quadrants of the sea. But today, their numbers have grown so small that the entire species has had to be protected by international law. Where do they come from? What brings them here? And what is the meaning of the song they sing? There is a sense of mystery attached to all whales, and particularly to the humpback. This is Richard Widmark. In the next hour, we'll be investigating some of those mysteries as we join a crack team of marine scientists searching for the secrets of the gentle giants of the Pacific. Less than 100 years ago, the humpback whale sported and spouted in all the oceans of the world. But it's a slow-moving whale, and therefore an easy target for the whaling industry. By 1966, when the humpbacks were given protection, the harpooners had shot the total population down to only 7,000 animals. Despite protection, it still ranks as an endangered species and may yet become extinct. Today, there are only isolated populations of humpbacks left, including those in the Pacific. In November, the first humpbacks appear off the islands of Molokai, Lanai, and Maui. It's thought they come here to calve and mate. By mid-season, there are about 400. The whales congregate in the sheltered waters of the old whaling town of Lahaina. In the 1850s, Lahaina roadstead would have been forested with the mass of whaling ships that ranged as far north as the Bering Sea and as far south as Cape Horn. This quite insignificant Hawaiian settlement became the wild and sinful whaling capital of the Pacific, a sort of Dodge City by the sea. Today, the whales are again at the center of Lahaina's prosperity, but in a quite different way. Lahaina has become a mecca for the increasing numbers of people who care about whales and the threat to their continued existence. Thousands of visitors arrive each year to observe, or just to catch a glimpse of the humpbacks offshore. There's a move to establish a whale reserve here. It would be America's first whale park. This 19th century brig being restored as a whaling museum is a reminder of the bad old days. The flag flying at her stern is an emblem of the better days that may come, provided we can achieve international cooperation and goodwill. Today, a new kind of whaling ship patrols the waters off Lahaina. The Easy Rider carries members of a scientific research project. From the moment she begins to patrol Lahaina Sound in search of humpbacks, she enjoys an escort of their smaller relatives, the Pacific spinner dolphins. Aboard her are the world's leading experts on the songs of the humpback whale, Katie Payne and her husband Roger. The team's mission is to study and measure and record everything they can concerning the humpback whale, to develop the knowledge vital to the protection of this extraordinary animal. And today they have a crack underwater camera team to help them probe beneath the surface. The team is headed by Al Giddings, one of the world's most expert divers and underwater filmmakers. A second underwater camera is handled by veteran Chuck Nicklin. Dr. Sylvia Earle, accomplished scuba diver and leading marine biologist, completes the scientific party. Whales are, of course, air-breathing mammals and must come to the surface at regular intervals to breathe through their blowholes. But the problem with studying a whale is that it's like an iceberg. Most of it lies beneath the surface. The advantage of Lahaina Sound as a study area is that the water is exceptionally clear. For the first time, the scientists will be able to dive and swim with the great animals to study their behavior, while the camera team records it on film. To observe the whale, as no scientist had seen it before, was the first objective of the expedition. The second was to learn more about how and why the humpback whale sings its mysterious song. So now an underwater microphone snakes downward to record one of the world's most uncanny and emotive sounds. The song of the humpback whale is immensely powerful. The entire song can travel as much as 15 miles underwater, and the deep bass notes can probably be heard 100 miles away. Amazingly, the whales sing their songs without benefit of vocal cords, simply by moving masses of air within their bodies. Sylvia Earle, working here with Peter Tyak, Roger Payne's research assistant, was soon to learn that when a humpback sings, it moves very slowly, sometimes lying almost motionless in the water. That means that these two whales beneath their boat are not the singers they're recording. They're far too active. The song comes from somewhere far in the background. The waters off Lahaina are particularly clear, without the clouds of plankton which the whales normally eat. So the question arises, what do these 40-ton giants feed on when they come to Hawaii? The amazing answer is, they don't seem to feed on anything. As far as anyone can tell, they get by with virtually no food whatsoever for a period of 4 or 5 months. During this period, they live on the thousands of pounds of blubber that encase their bodies. The whales proved very approachable by boat, but underwater it turned out to be a different matter. The team used big air tanks because they gave the best diving capability. But large air tanks are cumbersome and produce a long stream of bubbles when the diver exhales. Some remarkable scenes were obtained, like this shot of a pregnant female, one of 5 whales that stayed and swam with the divers for nearly 2 hours. But in general, the whales didn't hang around. Sometimes the humpbacks produced underwater bubbles, usually when 2 or more whales were together. The divers wondered whether their own noise and bubbles were disturbing the whales. The last thing they wanted to do was to upset the whale's serene underwater world. This shot gives an idea of a whale's size. Diver Sylvia Earle weighs about 100 pounds. The whale is closer to 100,000 pounds. Sylvia Earle once lived for 2 weeks on the seabed in a pressurized home with 5 other aquanauts. Swimming with the whales, she said, surpassed anything she'd ever experienced in a long underwater career. Often she felt the whales were watching her. At times they appeared intensely curious. This is a well-grown calf playing just above its mother. The whale song haunted them every time they dived. Sometimes it was an almost unbearable physical assault of sound and pressure, not only on the eardrums, but on their entire bodies. But what does the song mean? Many are convinced that the humpback's song holds the key to understanding the animal's sophisticated brain. In a moment, we'll see the dramatic discoveries they are beginning to make as they search for the secrets of the humpback whale. The divers decided to try a somewhat light-hearted experiment in Lahaina Sound. An underwater speaker was lowered to play back the whale songs they had already recorded. They maneuvered the rubber boats close to whales on the surface. Then Chuck Nicklin and Sylvia Earle went down to see what happened when the whales heard a reproduction of their own song. Would they react in any way? Whales did not show any obvious reaction to the playback, perhaps because the small speaker cannot reproduce the booming low tones of the whale song. No one was really surprised, only disappointed that their efforts had not brought them any closer to the mystery of the humpback song. The experiment had been a failure, perhaps, but only a partial one. Al Giddings and Sylvia Earle had been able to observe that the singing whales are usually alone, that they produce no bubbles, and that oftentimes they actually move their giant flippers as they sing. But the basic questions remain. Who does the singing? Is it only the males, or do mothers sing to calves? Does the song play a part in courtship? Is it some kind of rallying cry? None of the divers had much of a clue. Fortunately, the pained study of the song at the surface was proving more fruitful. For example, they discovered that the humpbacks of Hawaii sang a quite different song from the humpbacks of Bermuda, although obeying the same general rules of composition. Throughout each singing season, all whales in a given population sing the same song, which changes as the season progresses. At the end of the singing season, they go off to feed and do not sing a note for months on end. But months later, when they start singing once again, they pick up precisely where they left off. In other words, humpbacks have phenomenal memories. Roger transcribes the song just as if writing down music, which in a way he is. Each year, every singing whale sings the same song. But as individuals introduce new phrases, the other whales pick them up. In this way, over the year, the song gradually evolves and becomes distinctly different from what it was. Many animals sing, but as far as we know, the humpback is the only animal in the world that changes its song. Why it does so is still a total mystery. The colored bands on Katie's charts reflect the song themes common to 2 or more years. White areas indicate material unique to that year. This is a spectrogram, a recording electronically portrayed of a quartet of whales. And here are the individual voices of the quartet. What's important to note is that each whale is singing precisely the same song, although apparently oblivious of and ignoring the other 3. Why the humpback sings its song is still something even the Paynes can't fully answer. But they now strongly suspect the song is part of a breeding ritual sung only by the males. The underwater team was still looking for a better way to approach whales without disturbing them. So they loaded their rebreather apparatus with a chemical that takes the carbon dioxide out of the air they exhale. A rebreather recycles the air so that a diver breathes on a closed circuit, making no noise underwater and leaving only a small trail of bubbles behind him. The whales certainly seemed to appreciate the diver's courtesy and allowed them to approach really close. The humpback's unique flippers are sometimes 15 feet long and look almost like wings. At times, the whales appear to be flying rather than swimming. With one whale, they were close enough to film the barnacles on the leading edge of the flipper. These barnacles, a species which only attach themselves to whales, drop off in the warm water of Hawaii. But there's one serious snag to a rebreathing apparatus. A diver using such a device can only safely descend to 30 feet. Below that, he can quickly become dangerously ill. As long as the whale's obliged by swimming near the surface, like this, the rebreather paid off. The rebreathers produced one of the finest records of all. A remarkable close-up of a female passing directly in front of the camera, showing the pleated underside characteristic of humpbacks. Often, though, the whale suddenly decided to dive deeply. On one occasion, Chuck Nicklin followed them down to 60 feet in the excitement of filming, fortunately without serious results. Using rebreathers, Giddings obtained another fine shot of underwater bubbling. Results had been good, but the need to keep to the 30-foot level was proving too limiting. But as we'll see, the diving team had one further technique to try out as it continued its remarkable film record of the gentle giants of the Pacific. The divers had found that the whales were most approachable when the team snorkeled at the surface. Now they combined a snorkeling approach with the use of small, lightweight air tanks. One of the earliest successes was this close-up of a very old veteran covered with barnacle marks and body scars. It's believed that humpbacks live as long as we do, if a whaler doesn't catch them. This one may be anything up to 50 years old, which means it's a very lucky whale. The big humpbacks are the ones the harpooners usually seek out first. Most of this one's life would have been lived long before humpbacks were given protection, and even today they're not entirely safe. It's even possible that's a harpoon scar on its dorsal fin. When whales were spotted by snorkeling at the surface, it proved quite easy to swim with the small tanks and to dive briefly without alarming them. In this way, they obtained some remarkable group portraits, like this one of a mother with small baby swimming with two other adults in close attendance. Like all mammal mothers, humpbacks nurse their babies, and a young calf may grow as much as 100 pounds a day. Remarkably, the mother provides all the nourishment for this growth, even though she herself is not eating and will not feed for months to come. While they stalked the whales, the divers were sometimes stalked by a far more sinister hunter. Big white-tipped shark with a pilot fish seemingly glued to the end of its snout. All they could do was tread water and prey. There are no hiding places in Lahaina Bay. Finally, Sylvia Earle sends him about his business. She figured the shark was even more scared than she was. But never for one moment did the diving team feel themselves in any danger from the 40-ton giants. Gentleness was in the humpback's every movement. Gentleness, too, was obvious in the relationship between mother and baby. The little whale touching his mother frequently with his flippers, and sometimes appearing almost to hold on to her. Humpbacks are highly social animals, and even adults communicate by touching each other. The team had finally found the best diving technique for winning the whale's confidence. This whale swam so close that Al Giddings was tumbled back 10 feet by the wash of its tail flukes. But for all the team's successes, many questions remained unanswered. For instance, who is the third whale that often accompanies mother and child? Is it perhaps the father, or a suitor, or a helpful female, or perhaps an older calf? The third whale again from a different viewpoint. Note the two dolphins riding on the mother's bow wave and turning away to her port side. So many mysteries of the singing whale had yet to be solved. But at least in the clear waters of Hawaii, some of these mysteries had for the first time been glimpsed, even if not fully understood. Now it was time for the expedition to move to the icy waters of Alaska, where even more remarkable discoveries were to be successfully recorded. For years, mankind had concentrated on killing the humpback. Now, as we shall see, the emphasis would be on understanding how they live. Starting in late March, the humpbacks leave Hawaii. When they reach their summer home, they are thousands of miles away in the North Pacific. They have eaten almost nothing for months. Now they must replenish their enormous bodies. And as they break their fast, there's another change in behavior. Their mysterious whale song stops. They do not sing on their feeding ground and will not sing again until they return to the tropics. They travel slowly at 4 or 5 knots. The shape of the back, as well as the slender tail flukes, identify the traveler quite clearly as a humpback whale. Cameraman Al Giddings has filmed their progress in slow motion, but there's nothing slow about the telltale glow. A whale's lungs are the size of a compact car, and in order to change the entire contents of those lungs in only 3 or 4 seconds, it must exhale at speeds of up to 300 miles per hour. We are beginning to learn quite a number of details about how the humpback travels the ocean. What we still don't know is where they go. Where do Hawaiian whales go, for instance? This was another one of the problems our expedition hoped to solve. As in years past, the humpbacks who have spent 4 months in the tropics leave and migrate north. Some are thought to go as far as the Bering Sea. Others frequent the sheltered inland waters off southeast Alaska. Each year, about 20 animals enter the remarkable 50-mile-long inlet at the northern end called Glacier Bay. It's just possible that some of them have come from Hawaii. Glacier Bay is a beautiful, weird, cold place. The water in it is brackish rather than salty because the bay is fed by 12 huge rivers. Rivers of ice that flow out of the seemingly endless Alaskan peaks. Those glaciers dump their ice directly into the sea, a process known as calving. With its waters littered with bergs, Glacier Bay looks like a hostile place. But in the short Alaskan spring and summer, which reaches its peak around July 4th, wildlife finds it quite the opposite. Harbor seals come here to bear their pups on the ice. For water birds, Glacier Bay supplies ideal breeding grounds. Bald eagles nest here. There's seclusion for them and plenty of food. That fierce pirate, the glaucous winged gull, nests here in large numbers. When the nesting birds arrive, it's a sure sign that the humpbacks are not far behind, because both birds and whales come here for the same reason, to eat the shrimp-like creatures called krill that grow by the millions in the bay. About the same time, another annual visitor arrives. It's a boat called the Ginger. She's manned by the Geraz family. This trip, she also carries Dr. Sylvia Earle, fresh from Hawaii. Chuck Geraz is a marine biologist and school teacher from Alaska's capital, Juneau. With his family and selected research graduates, he spends the whole summer studying the humpbacks of Glacier Bay. Chuck's daughter, Sue, age 14, spots one of the first humpbacks of the season. Chuck first became involved when he used to fish for crabs in these waters on summer vacations. Then he began to study the glaciers in the bay and their effect on the ecology. From that, it was a short step to studying the most dramatic part of the ecology. The whole Geraz family is as dedicated to whale research as is Chuck himself. Their work this year has many objectives. One is to try to discover whether any of the humpbacks here in Glacier Bay come from Hawaii. If so, the team may be able to recognize them by the markings on their flippers and flukes. You might think this face was pretty distinctive and easy to identify. But in fact, all humpbacks seem to have rivets in their top jaw. When the whales first arrive in the cold waters of the bay, they're extremely active. They may be simply reacting to new neighbors and to new surroundings, but it's difficult not to think of some of their behavior as playfulness. The nearby activities of a pair of feeding humpbacks was enough to trigger this iceberg weighing several hundred tons to roll over. Some of their more violent displays may not be just play, and Chuck Geraz is studying this particular behavior very closely. Remarkably, considering how remote it is from civilization, every summer brings cruise ships to Glacier Bay. Sometimes when a ship passes, the whales slap their flippers violently in its wake. Glacier Bay comes under the U.S. National Park Service. The park's authorities are naturally anxious about the effect the boats may be having on the whales. Is this awesome flippering a territorial reaction to the cruise liners? Geraz feels that the humpbacks may be feeling pressure from the big ships. His studies indicate that the whales may be avoiding areas of heavy boat traffic, areas where only a few years ago they fed in peace. He's trying to find out if he's right. If the answer is yes, then future boat traffic may have to be limited, or the whales could eventually disappear. In his own approach to whales, Chuck could not be more cautious. He's determined to keep the bay as peaceful a home as he can. Here he carefully approaches two dozing whales, taking pains not to disturb their slumber. But a passing cruise ship seems to have a more drastic effect. The propeller beat of the liner probably caused the sleepers to wake up and, as it were, pull the blankets over their heads. If Chuck's theories are right, something will have to give. In midsummer, daylight in Glacier Bay lasts 18 hours, and as a result of the extra sunlight, the amount of plankton increases dramatically, and the population of krill that eat the plankton explodes. Krill are the humpback's principal food, so Sylvia Earle was especially interested in studying them. Krill are surprisingly difficult to capture in any numbers. Despite their size, they're fast swimmers and avoid capture only too easily, except when pursued by a whale. It is these tiny little shrimps that provide the protein to support the 40-ton humpbacks. By midsummer, they grow in such numbers that they turn the sea into a thick chowder-like soup. The ravenous whales often feed on this krill for 18 hours a day without stopping. When whale meets krill, the result can be a spectacular dinner party. The frenzied feeding of the Glacier Bay humpbacks turned out to be an unforgettable highlight of the expedition and provided some of the most remarkable film ever shot of any animals anywhere on Earth. The waters of Glacier Bay are much too thick with plankton for underwater photography, but being enclosed, they are usually calm, except when a 10-ton youngster they've named Garf decides to breach in the observation area. This surface calm makes the bay ideal for observing the humpback's feeding behavior. Infant humpbacks stick close to their mothers in the tropics, but here in the feeding grounds, they're beginning to show some independence. That's a humpback feeding on krill. This technique has been christened lunge feeding. Notice how the lower jaw is grotesquely distended by hundreds of gallons of water scooped up with the krill. Sometimes a pair of whales lunge feed together, as in this case. The one on the right is exposing the inside of its upper jaw, showing the white baleen plates which filter out the krill. As the right-hand whale sinks back in the water, the other whale shows a profile. Often the whale lunges on its side, or even on its back. The important thing is to get the krill. Table manners don't count. There are all sorts of variants on this method of feeding, most of them unimaginably weird to watch. In this spectacular sideways lunge, watch the pleats under the whale's lower jaw open up as hundreds of gallons of water, krill, and air are scooped up. Those pleats, so slick and streamlined normally, ripple like treads on a collapsing tire. The trick is to scoop up as much as that giant mouth can hold, then squeeze out the water before swallowing the krill. Look at how this whale grabs a snack. The small white spots on the chin are barnacles. Hanging below like seaweed are another species, goose barnacles. The second technique the humpbacks use is called flick feeding. The tail is flicked forward, throwing the krill toward that open scoop of a mouth. Again, it only works where krill are particularly concentrated. The tail movement is quite different from the one used when shallow diving like this. There's the flick again. But the most surprising discovery by Chuck Giraz in Glacier Bay concerns the third feeding method. This was first reported in 1928, but no one believed it. Now Chuck is unraveling its mysteries. It starts with a circle of bubbles. And ends with the whale surfacing nearly vertically, with mouth open, in the middle of the bubble ring. As it closes its mouth, watch the water being squeezed out, leaving the krill caught by the baleen plates. The really amazing thing is how the whale corrals the krill inside the bubble net. Hidden deep below the surface in the dark waters of the bay, the whale swims in a tight circle, pumping out a curtain of bubbles like a steam engine. The bubble net forces the krill to concentrate at the center, where the whale scoops them up in a single gulp. This amazing feeding technique is clearly a deliberate action, one of the most remarkable bits of animal behavior ever recorded. Just occasionally, the whale has a different twist, perhaps because the krill refuse to cooperate. Whatever the reason, the whale comes up horizontally instead of in a vertical position, already half prepared for the next dive. It makes a shallow dive to try again, often almost immediately. Its top jaw looks like a ship's hatch as it slams down on the krill soup. Every scientist who has studied the humpback is aware of a highly intriguing fact. The humpback whale has a brain over 5 times the size of man's. Equally important, that brain is formed much along the same lines as our own. It is a highly sophisticated, possibly even an intellectual brain. With this in mind, dare we let the last few members of this wonderful species sink from sight? There's a poignant and improbable postscript to the saga of the singing whale. Not long ago, spaceship Voyager was launched on a journey designed to last thousands upon thousands of years. One of its functions is to carry Earth sounds to the stars. And one of those Earth sounds is the song of the humpback whale. As it passes the planet Jupiter, 2 years after liftoff, Voyager will be hurled out of our solar system and into the stellar void, taking the whale song with it. Is it possible that thousands of years from now, some other beings will hear that song and recognize the joyful mystery that is the essence of the mighty humpback? Can we be intelligent enough to send out such a song, yet insensitive enough not to save the source? This is Richard Widmark. Good night.